Hello, welcome to today's edition of Pegasus Test. On today's edition is part 2 of SERPA holster problems.
Alright, now we're going to do some tests with the SERPA. The first one we're going to test is a level 2 drop leg for a Glock, specifically Glock 17 sized pistol. A little about this particular SERPA. This one was given to me by a friend who served overseas in a contracting company. This holster has been to Iraq and Afghanistan. It has a lot of mileage on it. It even has a lot of wear and tear. It originally started out black. It was spray painted tan, and then I spray painted it green to more match my local environment. Also, the previous owner did some work on it here to cut down some parts of the ridges that are around the release mechanism, and that was done because he was doing testing of his own and to see what would happen if he jammed a rock into it and how it would affect the system, and intentionally jamming a rock into it so hard that he had to Dremel it out. Hence, you will see, if it comes out on camera, that this upper section around the trigger release here on the SERPA has been ground down. Also, you notice that today I'm using a Gen 2 Glock 17 with a ZEV slide on it, ZEV 34 slide. Also, you will notice this sticks out a little farther than the holster. Okay, one of the things that we're going to test today is using the proper gun in the proper holster. So using a 34 length slide in a 17 length holster, is that going to cause problems? Right now in initial testing, no, it has not, but sometimes the camera will pick up things that you don't perceive while you're doing your draw stroke. Also, this is a safety issue. As I look straight down, and we'll try to capture some video of this later on, if this gun were to go off right now, I would get a bullet in the side of my foot. So we're not going to use live ammunition during this test. That's just ludicrous. So what we have here to show, the gun is empty. Removing the magazine, which was also empty. The gun will stay cocked, however, because that will be our true test to see if we're accidentally firing the gun on the draw stroke. Now let's go over what a proper draw stroke is, because we have a common baseline. You establish your firing grip on the pistol. Your trigger finger activates the lever, you pull up, and then at that point you should rotate forward. Holstering should be the same way. Your finger's off the trigger, you holster up properly until it engages. Now let's get one thing straight. Any holster whatsoever, if you leave your finger on the trigger like this and reholster, it will cause the gun to discharge, as you just heard. That's because I left my finger in the trigger. That is not a SERPA defect. That can happen with any holster, be it a USGI M12 holster, be it an Uncle Mike's brand, be it an ALS from Safariland, be it a 6004 from Safariland. Name your holster design. It will happen if you leave your finger in the trigger and holster up. Okay, that's not a holster design flaw, that's a user flaw.
First thing we're going to do is demonstrate the proper draw stroke. So establish your firing grip, bring your support hand to your chest, make a fist. That way it's out of the way. Defeat your retention device, remove the pistol, rotate it towards the target. At this point, bring your hands together and extend and aim at your target. Only when you're aimed and ready to target should your finger go to the trigger. So, that being the case, you holster in reverse. Your finger's only on the trigger ever when you're aiming at the target. So if you keep your finger off the trigger, you cannot have an accidental discharge. Okay, we're going to do the same proper draw stroke. This is the proper draw stroke regardless of the type of holster. This is now seeing it from the side. You've seen it from the front, now from the side. And that's another thing. If you have to look to holster up, look. There's a lot of schools of thought out there that says keep your eyes on the target all the time, but think about it. If your threat is at the point you no longer need to point a handgun at it, you can probably take your eyes off for a second to holster safely. Now we're going to demonstrate a different model of SERPA holster with a different pistol than it's normally designed for. The premise here is that if you're using the wrong pistol in the holster, it can lead to the malfunction. I'm using a Glock 17 with a ZEV 34 slide on it in a holster designed for a Glock 17. This is a SERPA Model 2 thigh rig. And with Model 2, I mean level 2 retention. That means there is a retention device that you have to deactivate with your finger. Proper way to do it is grasp, push your finger in, remove the pistol. Now, if this is a defective holster, this is where the firearm should discharge, thereby pulling a bullet into my leg. As said before, all holsters can have an accidental discharge if you leave your finger in the trigger when you reholster. That's any type of holster. We're going for SERPA specific problems here. Now, part of the premise is that if I grasp a gun and I'm pulling out all the world, my natural instinct is to push harder on the lever. Well, okay, I just did it. My finger did not go in the trigger guard. Let's try that again. Grabbing in, I'm pulling up against the lever, so I'm jamming it, cracking my finger. So it goes, and you can see my finger was stopped by the trigger guard. So, the theory that pulling up too hard on it will cause my finger to go in the trigger guard is pretty much busted. Now, I'm willing to concede I have big, huge hands. Big, huge, meat-grabbing hands. It could be the size of my hand prevents the finger from going into it because it does lay along the edge of the trigger guard. Maybe a person with smaller hands might have the problem. It's a factor we'll have to test. All right, we're doing more testing here on the SERPA. Now we're starting to come to some conclusions and some new hypotheses. On the drop leg holsters, when you're standing upright, yeah, it's going to work, and your chance of having the discharge happen, your finger hit the trigger, it's so hard to get your hand in a position that would create that if you establish a proper firing grip, it's not going to happen. But look now, I'm crouched down. My whole angle of my body and how my arm reacts to the holster has changed. So, I go, I'm pulling up the holster, I push in, and yeah, it went in. Now, I want to state for the record, I have a ZEV trigger on this. This is much lighter than your standard Glock trigger. The pistol did not go off, but my finger did hit the trigger. Let's do it again. Okay, pulling up, it went in. So, there is something to this. Now, we have to do more testing on this hypothesis. Why? As I mentioned earlier in the video, this holster's for Glock 17. This holster has been modified from standard Glock. I'm using a Glock 17 Gen 2 with a ZEV 34 slide. I may have a case of tolerance stacking here, but there is showing that there is something to this SERPA myth. To review, we went through a test of the SERPA holster, specifically the level 2 drop leg for a Glock 17. We intentionally used a pistol that wasn't designed for it. We used a Glock 17 with a ZEV 34 slide, so it's longer than the holster allows for. We also used a pistol that had a ZEV trigger. And the reason we did this was to give this the maximum opportunity for failure. Now, you did see in the video, we did have some cases where, under certain conditions, you could do the draw and your finger would come out and hit the trigger, but with a light ZEV trigger on there, it wasn't enough to drop the striker. So while there is some true potential that in the draw stroke, you could have an accidental discharge, thereby wounding yourself, we feel the chance is pretty remote. Matter of fact, it has to happen almost under a complete specific set of conditions, and if you're training properly, most importantly, establishing a proper firing grip, the chances of it happen are extremely rare. You probably got a better chance of getting struck by lightning and winning the lotto twice all in the same day, in my opinion. But this is only part 2 of the series. We're going to keep going on with this series for quite some time. 1, to build up a lot of data. 2, to try it with different models of SERPAs. Try it with different handguns within the different models. Like I said, in this one, we went with a Glock 17 holster with a 34 length Glock slide. Maybe it happens if you use a Glock 19 in a Glock 17 holster. Maybe it only happens on SIG 226s or Beretta M9s. It's going to be an interesting test to see what happens. I'm also beginning to start to form a hypothesis that a person's stature may matter, i.e. someone with very small hands, like a small petite person versus a big bruising dude, might have a different set of consequences that allow, or excuse me, circumstances that would allow the failure to happen on a more frequent or possibly a greater chance of the failure happening. That's the purpose of this series. We're going to keep trying different things out till we can narrow it down. Is it a specific model holster of SERPA? Is it a specific handgun holster combination? We're going to do what we can to figure out exactly where the failure occurs. We'd like to thank you for tuning in to today's edition. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and tune in for future SERPA test videos.